In 22 years at Fort Bragg, Colonel Ray Decker had saluted 3 people outside the chain of command. 2 of them were dead. The third was standing in the middle of the training yard on a Tuesday morning in September, her shirt torn at the shoulder, her boots caked with red Carolina clay, 5 feet 3 inches of absolute stillness, surrounded by 41 people who had no idea what they were looking at. Decker's hand came up slowly, not the crisp, automatic movement of protocol, something older. His palm flattened at his brow and stayed there, and the yard went so quiet you could hear the flag line snapping in the wind 40 meters away. His aide, a young captain named Burrell, stepped close and said something in a low voice. Decker did not lower his hand. He did not look at Burrell. He kept his eyes on the woman in the torn shirt and said 3 words quietly enough that only Burrell heard them. Burrell went pale. Nobody else in the yard understood what they were seeing. Not Jake Harmon, who was sitting on the ground where he had landed 8 seconds earlier, blinking at the sky with the bewildered expression of a man who could not account for how he got there. Not Tara Weston, who had been holding her phone up to record what she expected to be something very different. Not the 18 other trainees who had gathered to watch the 4 junior instructors at the perimeter, or the 2 visiting officers from the 82nd who had paused their briefing when the yard went silent. None of them understood what the salute meant. Every one of them felt it. This was 72 hours after Maya Calloway drove through the front gate of Fort Bragg in a 2003 Ford F-150 that had seen better decades. The truck was the color rust becomes when it has been there long enough to look intentional. The left rear quarter panel had been repaired with sheet metal that didn't quite match. The exhaust ran a low idle that sounded like a question it never finished asking. When Maya pulled into the processing lot and cut the engine, the truck shuddered once and went still, and the 2 trainees parked beside her glanced over with the look people give to things that don't belong. She sat for a moment before getting out. On the passenger seat, propped against the door, was a photograph in a cracked plastic frame. The man in it was not looking at the camera. He was crouched to eye level with a girl of about 12, his hand on her left shoulder, his face angled toward her, saying something she was clearly absorbing with complete attention. He wore faded woodland camo with no insignia visible. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. On his left forearm, the edge of a tattoo was visible, though the frame cut it off before you could see what it was. On the back of the frame, in handwriting that pressed hard into the cardboard, were 11 words. Don't show them who you are. Not until there's no other way. Maya looked at the photograph for 4 seconds. Then she picked up her bag from the back seat, opened the door, and got out. She did not look back at the truck. Her bag was an Army surplus Alice pack repaired so many times the patches had patches. Her boots were Danner's Resoled, twice the leather, soft and dark from years of oil and use. Her jeans were straight leg, no brand visible. Her jacket was an unlined Carhartt faded to something between olive and gray. She was 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 119 pounds on a full stomach, and she moved through the processing crowd with a stillness that was very different from timidity. Timidity shrinks. What Maya carried was something else. She took up exactly the space she needed, and not 1 inch more, and she watched everything. Not obviously, not the way nervous recruits watch things, tracking movement with their whole head. Her head stayed forward. Her eyes moved constantly, cataloging without appearing to the observation of someone trained until it required no deliberate effort. She noted the camera positions at the gate. She noted the guard rotation pattern, which repeated every 11 minutes. She noted the 2 instructors near the equipment shed talking in the clipped, half-finished sentences of men who had worked together long enough that full sentences were a waste of time. She filed all of it and said nothing to anyone. On the passenger seat alongside the photograph sat a second phone, not encrypted, not secured. A regular cell phone with a lock-screen photograph of a woman standing on the porch of a house in rural Georgia, late afternoon light making long shadows across the yard. The message notification on the screen read, "Mom, call when you land." Maya had not called yet. There is something that needs to be understood about Frank Calloway before any of what follows makes sense. Master Sergeant Frank Calloway served 21 years in the United States Army, the last 11 in a unit whose name does not appear on any public organizational chart, whose operational record lives in files carrying classification levels most senior officers will never hold. He was not famous. Fame and that particular unit are incompatible by design. But among the people who knew the men who had been in those rooms on that ground in those moments, when everything was on the line and there was nobody else left to call Frank Calloway's name, was spoken carefully the way you speak about things you respect too much to risk diminishing with ordinary language. He completed SFAS at 38 years old. That alone was not unique. The circumstances were. He fractured his right hand at the end of week 2, not a hairline crack, Two metacarpals and a proximal phalanx, the kind of injury that ends selection for nearly everyone who sustains it. The course physician told him he was finished. Frank listened with complete attention, the same attention his daughter would later bring to things she had no intention of being deterred by, and then asked what the regulation said about continuing with a documented injury. The regulation did not specifically prohibit it. He finished the remaining 3 weeks left-handed. Nobody knew until the final evaluation when the injury was formally documented. The selection commander at the time wrote one sentence in Frank's evaluation that never appeared in any public record but was repeated quietly among the men who heard it. He doesn't know how to stop. Frank Calloway came home from Kunar Province, Afghanistan, in a flag-draped transfer case in October of 2007. Maya was 14 years old. He had been training her since she was 12, starting the summer after he returned from his third deployment, and decided that whatever was coming for the world, his daughter would be ready for it. He did not train her the way coaches train athletes. He trained her as he had been trained, with the understanding that what was being passed down was not recreational. He taught her to shoot prone with an M24 at 400 meters, compensating for elevation and wind without a calculator. He taught her to read terrain the way you read a sentence, not letter by letter, but for meaning. He taught her close quarters techniques developed for people who understood the body as a system of levers, that leverage does not care how large you are. He also taught her something harder to quantify. He taught her to disappear. Not physically, in the way that matters operationally. The capacity to be present without registering. To be seen without being noticed. To let people see what they expect to see and never under any circumstances correct that expectation until correction was the only thing standing between someone living and someone dead. Don't show them who you are. Not until there's no other way. He had 2 years to give her everything he had. He was very good at what he did, and the things he gave her were the kind that compound rather than diminish like interest on something that never stops paying. Maya had kept that promise for 12 years. Not because she lacked opportunity to break it, because she had understood, sitting at that kitchen table at 14, with her father's voice still in the room, that some promises are not about the person you made them to. They are about who you are without them. She was still keeping it when she walked into the Fort Bragg SFAS processing building and checked in with a clerk who looked at her Alice pack and her worn Danners and her 5'3" frame and typed her information with the detached efficiency of someone who had already decided the outcome. In the barracks that first evening, she took a bunk in the corner bottom level, clear line of sight to the door. She unpacked with the minimum movements required. She placed her gear in the wall locker in an order that would tell her immediately if anything had been moved. She set her boots beside the bunk heels aligned to the footlocker edge. Then she sat on the bunk and opened a small notebook with a worn leather cover and a clasp requiring a 6-digit combination. The notebook was not a journal in any ordinary sense. No feelings recorded, no processing of events. What it contained was observations, names, behavioral patterns, physical details, the kind of information that becomes significant under cross-reference. She wrote for 11 minutes, closed the notebook, set the clasp lay back on the bunk with her hands behind her head, and looked at the ceiling. Someone's phone above her played music at low volume. 2 rows over, she heard the competitive positioning that recruits perform when establishing hierarchy in a new environment, the trading of credentials, the careful staking of ground. She listened without appearing to listen. She did not sleep for a long time. The first morning's formation assembled at 0530, and the social architecture of the group crystallized with the efficiency that high-stress environments always produce. Hierarchies needing months to develop in civilian settings formed in 40 minutes of pre-dawn darkness. Jake Harmon was at the center of it immediately. 6'2", 230 pounds, constructed with considerable time and money. His family carried a name in Army circles, not the kind that appears on buildings, but the kind mentioned in certain contexts with a particular tone. His father had been a brigadier general. His uncle had been special forces. Jake had grown up understanding that his arrival at a place like this was not an aspiration, but a scheduled event. He moved through the formation with the easy authority of someone who has never had to earn a room, only enter it. He noticed Maya the way predators notice differential. He was accustomed to differentials. He was comfortable with them. When the formation broke for equipment issue and the group moved toward the supply building, Jake passed close enough to Maya's left shoulder to make contact without making it look deliberate. Her pack shifted. She caught it without stumbling and kept moving without looking at him. He said something to the man beside him, and they laughed. Tara Weston already had her phone out. Tara was 24 fitness model attractive, in a way requiring both genetic good fortune and daily labor, and she had built a social media presence around her military training that was part documentation, part performance. She understood instinctively that the most engaging content was not her own competence, but other people's absence of it. She had found her subject before the first formation dispersed. Maya said nothing. She collected her equipment, adjusted the vest Sergeant Hollis handed her with the dismissive efficiency of a man who had issued thousands and had made certain assumptions about who this one would fit, and walked outside. Behind her, Tara said something pitched to Carrie. The laughter followed. Maya did not turn around. Outside, away from the group, she looked at the vest. 2 sizes too large, straps hanging loose. She set her pack down, took the vest in both hands, and began adjusting it. 6 minutes later, it fit correctly. The modifications were precise and functional, requiring specific knowledge of equipment, adaptation to fully explain. She picked up her pack and went to find the rifle range. The disassembly drill came on the second morning, designed to reveal the gap between people who have learned things for evaluation and people who learned them because the alternative was unacceptable. The weapon was an M4 carbine. Complete field disassembly, cleaning to specification, and reassembly within 2 minutes. Pass or fail, though the times were recorded and everyone understood the times would matter later, even without being told. Captain Brett Sims ran the drill. Sims was 37, lean, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples earlier than it should have. He had spent enough years evaluating people to have grown deeply skeptical of first impressions, a skepticism that in his case had calcified into professional suspicion, applied regardless of evidence. He was not cruel, he was precise. He looked at Maya's file on his clipboard and found almost nothing. A minimal service record, a background raising more questions than it answered, no unit affiliation explaining her presence. He categorized her accordingly. Not with hostility, but the flat certainty of a man who trusted data, and the data here was thin. He watched the drill from a position allowing him to see all stations simultaneously. Jake Harmon finished in 1 minute 51 seconds and stepped back with his arms crossed in the posture of a man expecting to be told he had won something. Tara Weston finished in 1 minute 46. 3 trainees failed to reassemble within the limit. The group average was 1 minute 38. Maya stepped to the station. She picked up the weapon and stood still for 1 second, not hesitating. The stillness of someone locating themselves in a task performed so many thousands of times that the body needs only a moment to find its starting position. Then her hands moved. Watching someone do something they have done 10,000 times looks nothing like effort. It looks like the opposite. The parts moved as though they wanted to be where her hands put them. Every surface cleaned in sequence. Each component returned to its place with the certainty of muscle memory so deep it no longer required thought. 47 seconds. Sims looked at the timer. He looked at it again. He looked at Maya, who had stepped back with the flat expression of someone waiting to be told they could move on. He looked at the timer a third time. Then he opened the notebook from his breast pocket, carried for 11 years, and wrote something in it. He said nothing. He acknowledged what he had seen, in no way visible to the group. He simply wrote, capped his pen, and called the next trainee. He kept Maya in his peripheral vision for the rest of the morning. That afternoon brought navigation. 10 kilometers of forested terrain outside the wire, a topo map, a compass, and a time limit requiring efficiency rather than speed. Maya had covered nearly 3 kilometers when Tyler Nash appeared. Nash was 26, wiry and ambitious in the way men become when proving something they have never fully articulated even to themselves. He had watched Maya with calculation, looking for the moment when demonstrating superiority over her would purchase him the most standing with the group. He jogged up beside her on a section of trail, bending around a stand of longleaf pine, looked at the map in her hand and said without preamble, "Let's see how you do without this." He took the map, not violently, the way people take things from those they have decided cannot stop them. He folded it into his cargo pocket and looked at her with the expression of a man waiting for a reaction he expected to enjoy. Maya stopped walking. She looked at him for 3 seconds with an expression that was entirely unreadable, not angry, not calculating in any visible way. Just still. Then she looked up at the tree canopy at the angle of afternoon light through the pines. She looked at the terrain ahead, the ground rising slightly left and falling away right. She looked at the moss on the north face of the nearest trunk. She adjusted her bearing 11 degrees left and kept walking. Nash called something after her. She did not respond. He stood on the trail watching her go, and something in the competence of her departure unsettled him in a way he could not have clearly named. He had expected confrontation or a plea or anger. He got someone who appeared to need the map considerably less than he had assumed. He pushed it deeper into his pocket and went back to his own navigation, which as it turned out required considerably more help than he had planned for. Maya completed the course 4 minutes inside the time limit. She was sitting on a fallen log at the finish point, eating a granola bar when Quinn Hargrove came through the tree line. Quinn was 28 medium height with a quality of physical composure rooted entirely in self-possession rather than athleticism. In 2 days of the program, Maya had observed that Quinn spoke when she had something to say and was entirely comfortable with silence when she did not. That made her different from nearly everyone else in the group, and it was the first thing Maya had noted about her. Quinn sat on the far end of the log without being invited. She took a water bottle from her pack, drank from it, and looked out at the trees for a moment. Then she reached into the side pocket of her pack and placed a folded topographic map on the log between them. Not handing it, setting it down, the way you leave something that belongs to someone without making a transaction of it. She capped her water and stood and walked toward the processing point. Neither of them said anything. Maya picked up the map, folded it into her jacket pocket, and opened her notebook. She added a single line. 48 hours and 43 people had interacted with her in some form. 42 of those interactions ranged from dismissive to openly hostile. One had not. The long-range marksmanship evaluation came on the morning of the third day, designed to end careers. 5 rounds at 400 meters. 5 bullseyes required no partial credit, and if you missed, you left. Not eventually. Your bag was packed by the time you walked back from the firing line. The group assembled at the range in early morning light, that flat gray September light making distances look shorter than they are, which was not accidental. Lateral wind off the tree line at 6 to 8 knots, gusting to 12. A temperature differential between the firing position and the target area that would affect trajectory in ways most of the group would not know how to calculate. Captain Sims stood to the side with his clipboard. Colonel Ray Decker had arrived to observe. He stood 20 meters back from the firing line, with his hands clasped behind him, extracting information from watching people before the pressure of observation altered their behavior. Jake Harmon fired first. His talent for marksmanship was real. He hit 4 of 5 to miss a 5th-round drift that went with a gust rather than correcting for it. He stepped back and looked at the target board, and his expression shifted in the way expressions do when something expected to succeed produces a slightly different result. Tara Weston hit 3. She did not look at anyone when she stepped back. Others cycled through. The pass rate was not high. Maya stepped to the line. Sims had been watching her approach with the attention of a man who has spent 48 hours collecting data and found himself unable to dismiss it. He had the clipboard in his left hand and his pen in his right. Maya settled into position. She did not adjust the scope. She looked downrange for a moment, and Sims, watching carefully, saw the small movements of her head as she read one off the grass deflection near the targets. She looked at the light. She made no adjustments to the rifle's external controls. She breathed. 4 counts in, hold slow. First round, bullseye dead center. Second round, bullseye fractionally left of center, the correct adjustment for lateral wind. Third round. She paused. The wind gusted. She waited. The gust fell. She fired. Bullseye. Fourth, bullseye. Fifth, bullseye. She stood safe the weapon and stepped back. The range officer walked to the target display and stood there for a moment. Then he walked back to the firing point, picked up Maya's rifle, and looked at the scope. He made a small adjustment with his fingers and frowned. He called Sims over. The 2 men spoke for 90 seconds. Sims's pen had stopped moving. He was very still, the stillness of a man receiving information requiring recalibration he had not anticipated. The scope was off by 8 MOA, 8 minutes of angle. At 400 meters, that translated to a deflection of nearly 33 inches. The rifle sights were telling the shooter something incorrect by a margin that should have put every round well outside the scoring area. She had compensated without touching the scope, reading the first impact at a distance where most people could not see the impact adjusting in her body rather than her equipment. The kind of correction described in marksmanship manuals as theoretically possible and achieved in operational training by people who have spent years arriving at it. Sims did not write in his notebook. He stood with the pen in his hand. Decker had moved. He was no longer 20 meters back. He stood directly beside Sims, and he was looking not at the target board, but at Maya, who was at the back of the group returning her hearing protection to its case with careful movements. Something had shifted in Decker's face. He was 61 years old. He had been in rooms where extraordinary things happened in the mountains of Afghanistan and the corridors of the Pentagon and the empty pre-dawn of ranges like this one, where young soldiers showed what they were made of under conditions designed to strip away everything that wasn't real. He watched her for another moment. Then he walked back toward the range building without speaking. That evening, Maya sat alone on her bunk. The group was at the mess hall or the recreation building. She opened the leather notebook and wrote for 7 minutes. Observations about the scope, which she noted had been modified externally, not defective from manufacture. Observations about Nash and his navigation performance. Observations about Sims and the quality of attention that meant something was being reconsidered. One line about Quinn Hargrove. Then she closed the notebook, set the clasp, and reached down to unlace her left boot. She removed it and held it for a moment. Then she reached 2 fingers into the space between the inner sole and the toe box and withdrew a piece of paper folded small enough to fit without affecting the boot's shape. She had not put it there. She unfolded it carefully. 4 words printed in block letters, small and precise, giving nothing away about the hand that had written them. Phoenix is not finished. She sat with the paper in her hands for a long time. The barracks were quiet except for the distant sound of the mess hall, 3 buildings away. Outside, the lights of Fort Bragg ran in straight lines toward the perimeter, and beyond that, the Carolina dark. She folded the paper. She did not burn it. She placed it at the back of the leather notebook behind the last page of observations and closed the clasp. Then she lay back with her hands behind her head and looked at the ceiling. Her father's voice clear in the way it always was when she was quiet enough to hear it. Don't show them who you are. She had 1 day left before that became impossible. The combat simulation was scheduled for the 4th morning. Its structure, simple in the way things designed to produce maximum stress, are always simple. 2 trainees, a padded training area 40 feet square. No weapons, no weight classes, no adjustments for size or any other variable. The point was not fairness. The point was information. Captain Sims read the pairings at 0600 formation, his voice flat and procedural, and when he said Harmon and Calloway, there was a beat of silence before the sound came. Not laughter exactly, the sound of a group that has decided what is going to happen and is settling in to watch it confirm their prediction. Jake Harmon looked at the clipboard, then at Maya and smiled. Not a mean smile, which would have been easier to dismiss. A comfortable smile. The smile of a man for whom this pairing required no preparation, no thought, nothing beyond the willingness to show up and allow the obvious to occur. He rolled his neck, cracked his knuckles, and resumed his position with the satisfied expression of someone who has already won something and is waiting for the formality. Maya did not react. She fixed her gaze on a point 18 inches above Sims's left shoulder and kept her breathing even. The observation group arranged itself around the perimeter with the organized enthusiasm of people given permission to watch something they have already decided. Tara Weston had her phone positioned before the participants reached their starting marks. 2 junior instructors stood at the east side talking quietly. Sims stood at the north edge with his clipboard. He looked at the matchup. He looked at his notes. He looked at Maya with an expression that had been shifting incrementally over 4 days, moving from flat dismissal towards something more complicated he had not yet resolved. Decker was not there when the drill began. He arrived 4 minutes in, walking from the range building at the unhurried pace of a man who has learned that urgency is usually a choice, and took up position at the south perimeter, hands clasped behind his back. He had been told there was a combat simulation this morning. He had not been told the pairings. He looked at the training area. He looked at Maya. He looked at Jake Harmon. His expression remained entirely composed in the practiced way of men who have seen enough that composure requires no active effort. Jake opened the drill with confidence and forward momentum and the assumption that direct force would produce the outcome he wanted. He moved across the training area, quickly getting his hands on Maya's collar with the practiced grip of a man who understood leverage and was accustomed to being the one applying it. He drove her backward. Her boots scraped the mat. Her back hit the padded divider at the perimeter, and the impact was audible, and the group made a sound compounded of reaction and encouragement. Jake leaned in, his forearms pressed against her shoulders. His hands were fisted in the fabric of her shirt at the collar, close enough that his voice when he spoke was not for the crowd, but for her alone. Maya looked at him. Her hands were at her sides. Her breathing had not changed. His grip shifted, and the fabric of her shirt, washed thin from years of use, did what old fabric does under lateral stress. It tore. A clean line from the left shoulder seamed down and across the sound distinct in the brief silence before whatever Jake said next. The shirt fell open from the shoulder. The training yard went quiet. On Maya Calloway's left shoulder blade, rendered in black ink with the precision of someone who had spent considerable time achieving it, was a tattoo occupying the space from the base of her neck to the midpoint of her shoulder. A hooded cobra, its body coiled and rising into a striking position, its hood spread its eyes rendered as hollow negative space that conveyed intensity rather than absence. Wrapped around the base of the coil, almost hidden within it, was a stylized skull compressed and geometric, the kind of detail invisible on a first look and impossible to stop seeing once you had. It was not the artistry that stopped the yard. It was the specific design, the configuration of elements, the precise way the cobra's body crossed the skull at the third vertebral scale rather than the first. These were not aesthetic choices. They constituted a language, and in that language, this arrangement carried one meaning attached to a unit that did not appear in any organizational chart without the highest classification, a unit formally dissolved in 2008, and whose dissolution had been announced in a two-line memo that was itself classified. Tara Weston's phone was still recording. She had forgotten she was holding it. She looked at the tattoo with an expression that had misplaced whatever certainty it had worn for 4 days. Jake Harmon was still holding the torn fabric. His grip had changed quality, the way grip changes when the hands receive information the mind has not yet processed. He looked at the tattoo, and then at Maya's face, and then at the tattoo again, and the comfortable smile was gone, replaced not by any specific emotion, but simply by the absence of the certainty that had been there before. Decker moved. He walked from the south perimeter across the training area with a pace that was not hurried and was not casual. The pace of a man who has decided something and is executing the decision. Junior instructors stepped back without being asked. Trainees separated to let him through without knowing why. He stopped 6 feet from Maya. His face had changed. Not in the addition of expression, but in the removal of the professional distance senior officers maintain, in all circumstances, a distance so habitual it starts to look like the face itself. What appeared beneath it was personal, rooted in a long time ago. He looked at the tattoo for 3 full seconds. Then he said quietly enough that the group strained to hear, and clearly enough that they were meant to, "Who authorized you to carry that mark?" Not a question in the ordinary sense. The statement of a man identifying something he had not expected to encounter, again asking for the explanation that would make it make sense. Maya looked at him. She had not moved since Jake's grip changed. She stood against the padded divider with her shoulder exposed and her expression composed as it had been for 4 days, but something had shifted beneath the composure. A focus. The quality of attention of someone who has arrived at the conversation they were waiting to have. She said, "He gave it to me himself. I trained under him for 6 years." The yard processed this in stages. Trainees without context heard the words and understood only that they had missed something significant. Junior instructors heard more and said nothing. Sims heard the words and looked down at his clipboard, and then up at Decker's face and closed the clipboard slowly. Decker heard the words and went very still. Then he did what none of the 41 trainees in the program had seen in any training environment and would not see again in their careers. He straightened to his full height, raised his right hand and saluted. Not the salute of protocol, not the brisk, functional gesture of military acknowledgement. Something older, something from a different place than procedure. Burrell, who had just arrived at the perimeter, looked at the salute and then at Maya and then back at Decker and said, "Sir," in a voice that needed a sentence to follow it and couldn't find one. Decker held the salute. He said no one bears that mark unless they earned it from him directly. He marked one student in his career. Jake Harmon released the torn fabric. He took a step back from Maya, and the step was not deliberate. It was what the body does when it reassesses a situation and finds the reassessment has significant implications for where the body should be positioned. Quinn Hargrove at the east perimeter watched all of this with an expression that was not surprised. She had been watching Maya for 4 days with the patience that allows you to see what is actually present rather than what you expect to see. She had not known what was there. She had known there was something. Now she knew. Maya acknowledged Decker's salute with a small nod. Precise. The nod of someone trained in what that gesture means, responding with the appropriate measure of respect for the protocol it represents. Then she reached up and pulled the torn shirt closed over her shoulder, as well as the fabric allowed turned, and looked at Jake Harmon. She said, "Do you want to continue the drill?" Jake looked at her. He was 29 years old and had never lost at anything that mattered, and had built his identity on that record with careful, continuous effort. He understood on some level that the past 4 minutes had recontextualized this drill in ways he hadn't had time to decode. He understood that the woman in front of him was not what she had appeared. He understood that Decker's salute meant something specific. He said, "I don't care what tattoo you've got. Prove it in a real fight." Decker lowered his hand. He said one word measured son. Jake said no. He moved back to fighting position. His fists came up. His jaw set. He was doing what men do when pride has become indistinguishable from compulsion, when acknowledging an error feels more dangerous than the error itself, when stopping seems like something that cannot be survived. He charged. Maya waited until he had committed to the angle, until his weight had transferred forward, past easy correction, and then she stepped inside his lead arm with a movement so small and precise that several people watching could not account for where she had gone. Her right arm came up along the outside of his neck. Her left arm completed the configuration across the back of his head. Her weight shifted once a specific transfer of force through a very small motion. 8 seconds. Jake Harmon's eyes went to the middle distance and then closed, and he went down the way. Heavy things go down when there is no longer any structural support holding them, not in pieces but entirely his full 230 pounds, finding the mat with a sound that completed the silence rather than broke it. Maya stood over him. She heard her father's voice clear in the way it always was. The moment you reveal yourself, you can never disappear again. She looked at her own hands. Steady. They were always steady. He had never had to teach her that. She had gotten it from him, not through instruction, but through proximity, through years of being near someone for whom stillness was not the absence of readiness, but its fullest expression. She had known the second the shirt tore, felt the fabric go, felt the air on her shoulder, and in that fraction of a second she had already understood. The promise was broken not when Decker saluted or when she answered his question, but in the moment the fabric failed, when the mark became visible to eyes that could read it. One irreversible instant. You could not unreveal yourself. She had known that since she was 12 years old, sitting across that kitchen table in rural Georgia, while her father explained with the patience he applied to everything that mattered, that anonymity once lost could not be fully recovered. You could build new disciplines, new approaches. But the specific invisibility of someone who has never been seen is not available again once it is gone. She was 26 years old and had been careful for 12 years, and it was finished now, and she looked at her steady hands and understood that this was not a loss. It was a door. Her father had told her that as well. Some doors only open once and from one side. Decker walked to where she was standing. The group around the perimeter had not moved. Tara Weston's recording was still running, though Tara had forgotten about it. Decker stopped beside Maya. He did not look at Jake on the mat. He looked at her, and his face carried the weight of something held for a long time and not expected to be set down. He said, "I need you to come to my office this afternoon." She said, "Yes, sir." He walked away. The group watched him go, then looked at Maya, then at Jake on the mat, and the architecture of the past 4 days rearranged itself around what they had just witnessed. Sims was writing in his notebook, not observing, writing with the urgency of someone documenting details before they blur. Quinn Hargrove looked at Maya across the training area. She did not nod. She did not speak. She held the look for a moment, and in it was the acknowledgement of someone who had watched carefully for 4 days and now understood what they had been watching. Maya held the look in return for the same duration. Then she looked away. The consequences arrived in the quiet, administrative way consequences arrive in institutional settings, without ceremony, without the public accounting the witnesses might have expected. Jake Harmon's case was referred to a military review board within 36 hours, not for losing the simulation. For the specific nature of the attack initiated before any sanctioned engagement began, the deliberate aggression directed at what was now formally classified as a credentialed operative, whose file, once opened by personnel with appropriate clearance, contained a service record that made the board's task considerably less ambiguous than most review boards prefer. He left Fort Bragg on a Tuesday morning. Sims was the only one who saw him go. The truck carrying Jake away from the base turned onto the main road and merged into traffic and disappeared, and the space it left behind was the kind nobody mentions, because mentioning it would require acknowledging it had meant something. Tara Weston's recording went a direction she had not planned for. The video she had intended to be one thing became something very different in the posting and in the 72 hours that followed. The comments section filled with energy unlike anything she had cultivated in her audience. Not the easy contempt of people watching someone struggle, but something more complicated and considerably less comfortable. The defense contractor sponsoring her training content released a statement 4 sentences long, notable primarily for how quickly it arrived and how completely it avoided her name in any context other than the termination of their arrangement. She deleted the post. The internet kept it. Captain Sims did something that no one witnessed except Quinn Hargrove, who happened to be in the administrative building and saw through the glass partition of the records office what Sims was doing at the file terminal. He was opening Maya's personnel file, not reading it. He had already read it, the thin, nearly empty record that had told him almost nothing 4 days ago. He was adding to it. He typed with the care of someone choosing words precisely, and when he finished, he reviewed what he had written, made 2 small changes, and saved the file. Then he took the notebook from his breast pocket, looked at what he had written on the morning of the disassembly drill, added a date and location, and returned the notebook to his pocket. Quinn watched this through the glass and continued down the hallway to where she was going. She did not tell anyone what she had seen. She did not need to. Decker's office was on the second floor of the command building, smaller than the ranks suggested, and more cluttered than the bearing implied, the clutter entirely of paper and maps, and the accumulated evidence of a career involving a great many places and a great many things that needed to be remembered about them. Maya sat across from him in a functional chair, and for a moment after she sat down, neither of them spoke. Not uncomfortable silence. The silence of 2 people who have not yet decided how to begin a conversation both know matters. Decker looked at his desk, then he looked at her. He said, "I was in Kunar province in October of 2007. Maya said nothing. She gave him the complete attention she had given to everything for 4 days, contained returning nothing without intention. He said, "Not in the same element. Adjacent. We knew your father's unit was working the valley that week. Nobody below a certain clearance level knew the specifics. With that unit, you didn't ask." He stopped, looked at his desk again. He said, "The night before there was a brief at the FOB, administrative mostly. Your father came through the building around 2200. He stopped at the door of the briefing room and looked in, and I happened to be standing near the door. He said it was going to be a complicated week. That was all he said. Then he left." Maya was looking at him. Her hands were in her lap, and they were still. He said, "I found out 3 days later. The transfer notice. The flag." He looked up at her. He said, "He never told me what was in the operation." But he knew, the way some people know things before they happen, not from intelligence, but from having been in enough situations to read the shape of what is coming. He knew, and he went anyway, and I have thought about what it takes to know something like that and go anyway, and I have never arrived at a complete answer. Maya said, "I can tell you what was on it." Decker looked at her. He said, "What?" She said, "The piece of paper, the one he wrote the night before." "I know what was on it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He had a version of it on the refrigerator at home, written in his own hand on a card with a magnet from a gas station in Savannah." 4 words. Decker waited. She said, "Do what is right." The office held that for a moment. Outside, Fort Bragg continued its ordinary sounds, vehicles and formations, and the distant percussion of a range 3 miles away. Decker said yes. He said it with the weight of someone confirming a long suspicion, moved by the confirmation regardless of the absence of surprise. After a moment, he opened his desk's top drawer and removed a manila folder not thick and placed it between them without opening it. He said, "Your application to this program came through standard channels." Everything looked normal, but I ran a query on the authorization chain after the marksmanship evaluation. He put his hand flat on the folder. He said, "The final approval signature is registered to a personnel code not in any active directory I can access, not classified, not restricted, simply not present. An authorization from someone who officially does not hold an active position at the Pentagon." He looked at her. He said, "Do you know who signed your application?" Maya looked at the folder for a long time. She said, "I think I might." She said nothing else, and Decker did not push. He had been in enough conversations with people carrying things not yet ready to be fully put down. He closed the folder. He said, 3 weeks ago, a signals intercept out of a listening post in Germany flagged a communication string using a specific encryption protocol. The protocol is old, last used operationally in 2007. The cryptography unit flagged it because the protocol was supposed to have been decommissioned when the unit it belonged to was dissolved." Maya was very still. Decker said the content was not fully decoded, but the signature block at the end used a call sign. He paused. He said, "The call sign was Phoenix." Maya looked at the folder. She looked at it with the expression of someone told something they already knew and now deciding what to do with the confirmation. She said, "When was the intercept dated?" Decker said September 14th. She had arrived at Fort Bragg on September 15th. The room held that information. Decker watched her process it, watched her work through the implications with the contained efficiency of someone very good at processing things without broadcasting what the processing reveals. He said, "I don't think your presence in this program is accidental." She said no, said with the flatness of someone confirming a fact established some time ago. He said, "Are you going to tell me why you're here?" She looked at him. For the first time since sitting down, something shifted in her expression. Not an opening exactly, the consideration of one. She said, not yet. He accepted this. He leaned back and looked at the ceiling, and his face carried the expression of a man who has learned that some answers arrive on their own schedule, and that patience is the only productive response. He said, your father trusted me enough to tell me it was going to be a complicated week. I'm asking you to extend me the same. Maya looked at him. The consideration in her expression resolved into something more settled. She said, I'll need access to the signals archive from September of 2007. Anything that came through Kunar province in the 72 hours before and after October 3rd. Decker looked at her. He said, that is a significant request. She said yes. He was quiet. Then he opened the top drawer again, took out a different folder, and wrote a code on the front in pen. He slid it across the desk without explanation. She picked it up, looked at the code, placed it in her jacket pocket. She stood. She said, sir, what you said out there today about his only student. Decker looked up. She said he would have been glad you were the one who recognized it. She left before he could answer. The hallway outside his office was empty. She walked it at her usual pace, her boots quiet on the linoleum, the folder in her pocket, and the note from her boot, and the tattoo on her shoulder that the whole base would know about by evening. She stopped at the window at the end of the hall, looking out over the training yard where the morning's drill had taken place. The mat had been removed. No visible evidence anything had occurred there. The Carolina September afternoon continued its work, light shifting toward the quality that means the day has passed its turning point. She thought about her mother in rural Georgia. The phone call still waiting. She went to find a phone she trusted. General Daniel Shaw arrived at Fort Bragg on the morning of the 7th day in a vehicle drawing attention not by its appearance, but by its plates, and the particular unhurriedness with which it moved through the base, the unhurriedness of official vehicles that have clearance, eliminating the need to stop. He was 54 years old with military short hair gone silver gray at the temples and staying dark at the crown, and he moved with the economy of someone who has spent enough time in operational environments that conservation of motion has become structural rather than deliberate. He wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, and a jacket, not trying to look military and not needing to. Maya was finishing the morning physical assessment when the vehicle came through the main gate. She saw it in her peripheral vision during her final run interval, a dark shape at the perimeter, and followed it without breaking stride. Sims called the end of the assessment. The group dispersed toward the equipment building. Maya was moving with them when she heard Burrell's voice behind her. He said, ma'am. She stopped and turned. Burrell stood at the edge of the training area with his clipboard flat against his chest, and the expression she had learned over several days meant he had been given a task he found moderately uncomfortable. He said, there's someone at the main gate to see you. She said, who? He said, I was asked not to say ma'am. She looked at him for a moment. He held the look without flinching, which she noted. She said, I'll be there in 10 minutes. She went to the barracks, washed her hands and face, picked up her jacket and the leather notebook and the folder from the signals archive, and walked to the main gate. The vehicle was parked on the access road outside the perimeter. The driver stood beside it with the composure of someone told to stay with the vehicle and comfortable with that assignment. The gate guard had stepped back to the distance guards maintain when someone has arrived with credentials exceeding the standard scope of gate authority. Decker was there standing to the right of the gate, hands behind his back. Shaw stood on the access road. When Maya came through the gate and saw him, she stopped walking for one full second. She had his number memorized and no photograph of him on any device she carried. She had been married to him for 3 years in a ceremony lasting 11 minutes with 2 witnesses, neither of whom she could name in public. Her mother knew his first name. Her mother knew he was a good man. Her mother did not know his rank, and Maya had decided each time the question came close that the information would not make her mother sleep better. Shaw looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile but occupied the same space. He said, you held longer than I expected. She said, you should have given me more time. He said, I gave you 7 days. She said 7 days wasn't the agreement. He said the agreement changed. Without apology, which she did not require. Agreements in their line of work changed when circumstances changed. That was not a moral failure, but a structural reality, the kind her father had explained when she was 14 and asked him why he kept going back when he said he was going to stop. Because the world doesn't stop moving just because you have. She looked at Shaw. She said, the intercept in Germany. You knew. He said, we knew there was traffic. We didn't know the content until 2 days ago. She said, what was the content? He was quiet for a moment. He glanced at Decker, not asking permission, acknowledging his presence in the conversation. Decker gave a small nod. Shaw said 3 Defense Intelligence Agency operatives working a network in Eastern Europe went dark 8 days ago. Standard protocol gives 72 hours before escalation. We escalated. Nothing came back. 6 days of nothing. Then yesterday morning at a relay station in Warsaw intercepted a single transmission from the last known location of one of the operatives. He paused. He said, one word, Callaway. The access road held its quiet. The gate guard stood 30 feet away looking at nothing in particular. Maya said, they weren't using my name. Shaw said no. She said they were using his. Shaw said yes. She thought about the archive. The communications from 2007 using the Phoenix protocol, the fragmentary transmissions in the QNAR window, the syntax embedded in routine operational traffic that would have looked unremarkable to anyone not specifically looking for it. She said he left something in that operation. Something supposed to be finished that wasn't. Shaw said, we think so. She said, and someone over there knows it by his name. Shaw said the operative who transmitted her name was Sandra Greer. She worked Central Europe for 11 years. She knew your father. Not operationally. She was 2 years behind him in a training program that no longer exists on paper. She would have known his name as a call sign. Maya looked at the tree line beyond the perimeter fence, at the particular brass quality of morning light through Carolina pines. She said, what was he doing in Kunar that they would still know his name 12 years later? Shaw said, that's what we need you to find out. He said, because whatever it is, it's still active. Whatever he left unfinished, someone over there has been maintaining it. And now they've surfaced, used his name, 3 of our people are missing, and we need someone who understands the architecture of what he built well enough to find the door. She said, you could have just asked me. He said, I did. In October of 2007, when you were 14 years old, and your father was in Kunar province and I was at the Pentagon reading a report I was not supposed to be reading, I made a decision about your future I had no right to make unilaterally. He stopped. He said, I put you in this program because I needed to see if 12 years of keeping that promise had cost you anything that couldn't be recovered. I needed to know if the skills were still there under the discipline of hiding them. I needed to know what happened when the hiding stopped being possible. He looked at her steadily. He said, now I know. The access road was quiet. Somewhere on the base of formation was running the cadence count carried faintly on the wind. Maya said, my father trusted you. Shaw said, he told me once that trust was not something he extended on the basis of history. It was something he recalculated continuously based on evidence. He said the mistake most people make is stopping the recalculation. He said, I have tried to operate accordingly. She studied him. 12 years of keeping the promise had shaped her face in a way sustained discipline shapes everything. It touches, not hardening it exactly, but reducing it to essentials, removing the excess, leaving what is structural and nothing more. She looked older than 26 the way some people do when they have been carrying things for a long time, and younger the way people do when the carrying has not broken them. She said, I'll need the full archive from 2007. Not the signals partition Decker gave me, the operational record. Shaw said it's classified above your current authorization level. She said, then authorize me. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small envelope sealed and held it out. She took it. She said, one more thing. He said, tell me. She said, whatever my father left in that operation, I don't work inside the wire. I follow the architecture where it goes and make my own decisions about what to do when I get there. I report back, but I don't ask permission. Shaw said, that is not a standard operational arrangement. She said, no. He was quiet. Then he said, your father said the same thing the first time I gave him an assignment. She said, what did you tell him? He said, I told him yes. She put the envelope in her jacket alongside the folder from the archive and the notebook and the note from her boot. She buttoned the pocket. She looked at Decker. He stood in the same position he had held throughout, hands behind his back face, carrying the composed expression of a man who has heard things he will not discuss and is at peace with that arrangement. She said, sir, what you told me in your office about my father. Decker said yes. She said it helped. He looked at her. The professional distance he maintained in all settings was present as it always was, but behind it was the expression that had appeared briefly the previous afternoon, the expression of someone setting down something they have been carrying for a long time. He said, I'm glad. He said nothing else, and she did not need him to. She went back through the gate. The guard nodded once as she passed. She went to the barracks. The building was empty at this hour. She sat on her bunk and opened the envelope. Inside was a single card with authorization codes, a date, a location, and a contact protocol. Below the codes, handwritten in small, precise block letters, Sandra Greer's last known position. Warsaw, September 19th. You have 48 hours from that date before the window closes. She looked at the block letters, small and pressured, the same style as the 4 words printed on the paper she had found in her boot. She thought about what Shaw had said about her father's operation, about the authorization code on her application registered to a personnel code, not in any active directory. She thought about who inside Fort Bragg had known she would be there and had known what Phoenix meant to her specifically. She looked at the handwriting on the card again. Then she filed it and kept moving. There would be a moment to ask him directly somewhere she could ask without being overheard. She would find that moment. She began packing with the efficiency of someone who has done it under pressure enough times that efficiency is no longer a goal but a reflex. The gear going in first was the gear that mattered most, not by value but by function. The notebook, the Danner boots, the photograph in the cracked frame. She placed the photograph in the front pocket of the Alice pack, accessible without stopping. When the pack was ready, she set it beside the bunk and looked at the wall locker, empty now, and at the bunk above hers, unmade and anonymous as it had been from the first night. She took the regular phone from her jacket, her mother's photograph on the lock screen. The house in rural Georgia, the porch of the woman standing in late afternoon light with the posture of someone who has been waiting a long time and has become very good at it. The message notification still there. Mom, call when you land. The call connected on the second ring. Her mother said Maya. Not a question, just the name. The way a name sounds when someone has been holding it ready. Maya said, Mom, I'm okay. Her mother said, I know. I can tell from how you said it. Maya looked at the empty wall locker. She thought about how to say what needed to be said, which was not the full truth and was not a lie, but was the portion of the truth a phone call could carry without breaking something. She said, I'm leaving Fort Bragg tomorrow. I have an assignment. Her mother said, where? Maya said, I can't say. Her mother was quiet for a moment. She said, is it like what your father did? Maya said, some of it. Her mother said, he used to say that, some of it, when he didn't want to tell me more. Maya said, I know. Her mother said, he was always okay when he said some of it. The times I worried were the times he said nothing at all. Maya said, I'm saying some of it. Her mother said, I know, baby. I know. The line was quiet, with the quiet of two people who know each other well enough to communicate in the spaces between sentences. Her mother said, there's something I need to tell you. I've been meaning to tell you since you called from the airport. After your father died the following spring, when I finally went through the storage unit, the one he kept off base, the one I didn't have the key to until the lawyers sorted everything. There was a box in the back, not labeled. A gray metal box, military, the kind with flip latches. Maya was very still. Her mother said I didn't open it. I looked at it for a long time and then put it back and locked the unit and went home. I didn't go back for 2 years. Then one day I went back and opened it. She paused. She said inside there was one thing, a sealed envelope. And on the front of it, in his handwriting, it said, for Maya when she's ready. Maya said nothing. Her mother said, I've had it for 15 years. I didn't know when ready was. I kept thinking I'd know. Then last month, before you left for Fort Bragg, you came by the house and sat at the kitchen table, the way you used to sit when you were learning something with your whole attention, and I thought maybe now. She said I was going to give it to you before you left. Then you were going out the door and I couldn't make myself say, wait, so it's still here. Maya said, don't open it. Her mother said I wasn't going to. Maya said, I'll come for it when I get back. Her mother said, okay. She said, Maya. Maya said, yes. Her mother said, come home. Maya said, I will. She said it the way her father used to say it, not as a promise that the future was safe, but as a statement of intention carried forward into an unknown future that would be navigated with the tools available in the direction of home. She ended the call and sat with the phone in her hand. Then she put it in her jacket, picked up the Alice pack, and went to find Quinn Hargrove. Quinn was at the equipment return building, handing in her training gear. In the methodical way she did everything, each item checked against a list, each placed precisely in its designated location. She looked up when Maya appeared in the doorway, and her expression was the same it had been for 7 days, composed and attentive, returning exactly what it chose to return. Maya stood in the doorway. She said, you were watching from the beginning. Quinn said, yes. Maya said, why? Quinn considered this. She said, because you moved like someone taught by someone serious. And because the way you didn't react to things told me more than any reaction could have. She said, my grandfather was at the Chosin Reservoir. He never talked about it, but he moved the same way you moved, like someone who learned a long time ago that the people worth worrying about are the ones you don't hear coming. Maya looked at her. She said Sims updated your record. He added the marksmanship observation from day 2 and the navigation result. Quinn said, I know. Maya said, he's a good officer. Quinn said, yes. He gets better at the job the longer he does it. That's not as common as it should be. Maya adjusted the Alice pack strap. She said, take care of this program. Quinn said, that's not my assignment. Maya said, it will be. Quinn looked at her steadily. She did not argue the point. Maya nodded once. Quinn nodded once in return. Maya walked back to the access road where the F-150 was parked. The morning light was full now. September, honest, bright, and clear, with an edge underneath it reminding you summer had made its decision. She put the Alice pack in the bed of the truck, wedged it against the wheel well to keep it from shifting on turns. She got in the driver's seat and sat for a moment. She picked up the photograph from the passenger seat. The cracked frame, the man, and the 12-year-old girl, the 11 words on the back she did not need to read because she carried them somewhere deeper than memory. She looked at his face. He had started teaching her when she was 12 years old. He had died when she was 14. 2 years to give her everything he had. She had spent 12 years deciding that 2 years had been enough. Not because it was easy, but because he had been very good at what he did, and because the things he gave her compounded rather than diminished the way certain kinds of knowledge do when the person receiving them takes them seriously. She thought about the box in the storage unit, the gray metal with the flip latches, the sealed envelope, the handwriting on the front chosen with the deliberateness he applied to everything that mattered. For Maya when she's ready. She had not known when he wrote it what ready would look like. She thought she understood now. The readiness he meant was not a matter of skill. It was a matter of having lived long enough inside a hard thing to come out the other side still recognizably yourself. 12 years. She was 26 years old and had kept a dead man's promise for 12 years, and it was finished now. And what waited on the other side of it was his voice sealed in an envelope telling her whatever came next. She set the photograph back against the door. She turned the key. The engine shuddered once and found itself and settled into its low questioning idle. She put the truck in drive and moved on to the access road. At the main gate, the guard stepped out of the booth and looked at her. He was young, 22 or 23, with a combination of seriousness and uncertainty that young soldiers carry before one or the other wins. He had not been the guard when she arrived. He had heard the story secondhand and compressed the shape without the texture. He looked at her in the truck and raised his hand in a salute that was not protocol for a civilian vehicle leaving a base. He just did it, the way Decker had done it. Because some things the body understands before the regulations have anticipated them. She raised 2 fingers off the steering wheel and drove through. The road from Fort Bragg ran north and then northwest past the pine stands and access roads, and the slow suburban geography surrounding all large military installations, the tire shops and pawn shops, and check cashing places, and barber shops with high and tight photographs in the window, and then past all of that into the ordinary American landscape of highway and overpass, and the long clear stretches, where the road goes where it says it is going, and you can see a long way ahead. She drove with both hands on the wheel and the photograph on the seat beside her, in the morning sun behind her heading north toward a name that had surfaced after 12 years of silence. In the front pocket of the Alice pack accessible without stopping the sealed envelope from Shaw. Authorization codes, a contact protocol, and address in Warsaw. In her jacket, the leather notebook with the 6-digit clasp, the observations accumulated over 7 days that would not be the last she added to it. On her left shoulder blade, the ink placed there by a man she had trained under for 6 years. The coiled cobra and the compressed skull. The mark of a unit whose dissolution had apparently been administrative rather than actual. In a gray metal box with flip latches in a storage unit in rural Georgia, in a sealed envelope that had been waiting 15 years, whatever her father had left for the moment she was ready. She drove north. The highway opened up ahead of her, straight and lit by the full September morning. The truck ran steadily in the right-hand lane with the low questioning idle of an engine, asked a great many things over a great many miles and not yet refusing any of them. In a relay station in Warsaw, a woman named Sandra Greer had transmitted one word before she went dark. The word was Callaway. It had come after 12 years of silence, which meant something had changed, and things that change after 12 years of silence do not change by accident. Someone had maintained something her father left unfinished. Someone had kept a protocol alive that was supposed to be dead. Someone had placed a note in her boot on the first night at Fort Bragg, someone who knew she would be there and knew what Phoenix meant to her specifically, someone whose handwriting matched the block letters on the card in her pocket. She would ask Shaw about it when they were somewhere she could ask without being overheard. She would ask him soon. The road ahead was long and straight and honest in the way September roads in Carolina are honest, and she drove toward it with both hands steady on the wheel, and everything her father had given her present and intact and waiting to be used for the purpose it had been built for. Major General Frank Calloway had trained his daughter for 2 years and given her 12 years of instructions she carried in her bones. She had been 12 years old the first time he handed her a rifle. She had been 14 the last time he came home. She was 26 years old now, 119 pounds, driving north toward a name no one was supposed to know anymore. The engine idled its low question into the morning air. She had an answer.